Hello, and welcome to Learn Python 3 the Hard Way, exercise 46. This video is for Windows 10. If you don't have Windows 10, there's an OS 10 video that will cover OS 10 and Linux. As you go through this, I want you to first try it in the book. The reason why is even though I'm going to sit here and actually install everything on Windows, that's not reality. The reality of the software world is almost all instructions have only text, only documentation, and the documentation is usually not that good. It's very common for programmers and companies and professional tech writers to create the perfect documentation or the documentation that only works on their computer. It's called works for me. So when you go to install software, you have to do it from docs, and it's important that you learn to read documentation and follow installs. And when you run into a problem, figure out what the problem is. A lot of times you'll run into a problem and you have to just figure it out. Because when you go to ask someone for help, they're going to say, I don't know, man, works for me. So just try to do the documentation as hard as you can. Try to figure everything out. I'm going to give you a couple clues with that. If you haven't gone through Appendix A, do it now. If you don't know the command line, do it now. Whenever you get stuck, pwd ls, pwd ls, pwd ls. Over and over again. That's what you do. You need to know where you are and what is there. That's a key ingredient to figuring out what's going on in the command line. If you get missing files, if you get bad installs, if you get bad directories, Google it. Any error you get, Google for it. And if you can figure out how to install from documentation, then you're pretty far along when it comes to trying to install software you need to work with and do things within the programming industry. Okay, now I'm going to try and install everything, but rather than sit here and bounce back and forth like this, I'm going to have my instructions off screen. So I'm using a second computer. I'm going to try and do it this way. Okay, let's give this a shot. All right, so first thing is we're just going to go to the home directory. I'm already there. And just run Python just to make sure I've got the right Python. Okay, so that's pretty close. Mostly the same thing. I upgraded to the latest 361 in the book. At print, it was 360, but there's no difference. Now the next thing I do is I do a pip list, and my pip might actually have a lot more stuff. But so far, yeah, just pip and setup tools. That's all you should have. Probably slightly different versions, but that's fine. Now the next thing we're going to do is pip install virtual env. Okay, that install took a little bit of time for me. Maybe your internet is faster. What virtual env does is it makes it so that you can create a sort of like off-screen or secondary install of software that doesn't change your computer. It's very useful, especially if you have to switch versions of Python. You can use the virtual env to lock the version of Python to 3.6, 2.7, things like that. It's not super reliable at that, but it will work for that. So once we do that, I want to do make dir vmvs. So that's virtual envs. And this is sort of just how I do it. Seems to work really well. Other people use other software and other ways of doing it, but other ways of storing it. Most everyone uses virtual env. So when I'm there, then I need to tell virtual env, and there's this option, and it's debatable whether people include this or not. But what this one is probably what you want, which is you want the current software that's installed on your system as a base, which for us is very small things, and then you add to that. If you want to have a complete clean slate, then don't include this option. But for us, we're just going to do this. We're going to do system site packages. And we're going to do VMs and Python the hard way. Now, it's going to copy the Python we're using, which is 3.6.1, and it's going to set up a few of the base things, and then we're going to activate this as the next one. Okay, that's set up. So now we need to activate it. And this is a different on Windows than it is on other systems. That's mostly just because of the way PowerShell works, I guess. Other systems, the directory here is bin, and on Windows it's scripts, so I'm not sure why. And we do activate. And that'll take a few seconds, but when we're done, we'll then have, if you notice down here, we have Learn Python the Hard Way mentioned in our thing. So now we know that we're using the Learn Python the Hard Way a virtual environment. So as we install software and do stuff, we don't have to worry about it conflicting with what's in the system. It'll be stuck at this. It'll also make sure that we have the right setup, that all the right versions of Python are there. Everything's ready to go. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is pip install nose. Now, a word of warning. Pretty much right when I handed the book to the publisher, I found out that nose, I don't know if it happened then or that's just when I found out, but I found out nose got deprecated. Nose is a testing tool. So later on, after we've published everything, I'll be doing an updated video that installs a different testing system and rewriting some exercises that use a different testing system. But I'm doing these videos first, so that way everyone knows with the current version of the book how to get around nose being old, okay? All right, so now we have nose installed, and actually probably type nose tests, and it'll just do that. It doesn't do anything. We should have a program called pip. That's fine, and we're ready to go. Okay, so now I'm going to make a directory called projects. Now keep in mind, I've been in a directory called Learn Python the Hard Way making my stuff. And if you've been following along, you have that. But now we're going to make a new directory called projects. Where you put your stuff after this is totally up to you. You can go back to Learn Python the Hard Way directory. You can put your stuff in projects. It totally doesn't matter. But the reason for making a projects directory is if you make new stuff, you need to have an organized place to store it. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a sort of blank project called skeleton. So the skeleton project is the bones of a project. That's why it's called a skeleton. Oh. And then I'm going to do makedir bin name tests and docs. And actually, I'm not sure if this will work. That's actually right. Bin makedir name makedir tests, makedir docs. Okay, in the book for Windows, I have a mistake where I tell you makedir bin name tests and docs. Don't do that. Just do it the way I did up there. If you have an old print of the book, it will say that. All right. So now we then need to make, and if we do ls, remember pwd ls, pwd ls, pwd, that's where you're at, ls, that's what's there. Do that all the time. You can think of the command line as very similar to the text adventure you've written. You know, the Gothon's game and your game and the other game. It's a text adventure. And what's the first thing you do when you enter a room in a text adventure? You go, look around, right? You do something like that. So that's what pwd is in ls. Where am I and what's there? Okay, so this is our setup. The bin directory is going to be where we put scripts that we want to install onto the machine. Docs is documentation. And most people ignore that, but it's kind of important. Name will get changed to the name of your project later. And tests is where you'll be putting your automated tests. Okay, now for name and tests to work, we need to do new item type file name / double underscore, that's dunder pi, and new item file tests double underscore init double underscore pi. Okay, so now if I do ls, I'll know what's in that directory, and if I do ls name or tests, right, I have this dunder init file. And what the dunder init file and then name has the same thing. Although actually, here, let me remake file name dunder init.py because I was messing around off screen. Okay, so now if I do ls name, you see that. Now, the dunder init file is how you would put code that you need to edit or that you need to run when the name directory is loaded or when the test directory is loaded. In old Python, you had to have this for it to work. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove init.py, and I'm going to show you what happens. Okay, in old Python, if you didn't have this dunder init.py file, it would refuse to load the name directory. Python 3, however, will load it. So let me start it up. First, I'm going to import tests. Import tests. Oh, if I could do it right. Okay, that works. That's how it would work in normal Python, in Python 2. Now, I'm going to do import name. I've removed the dunder init directory, okay, and there was no other thing in there. And so in Python 3, it still works, but in Python 2, that would have caused an error. Okay, it's just important for you to kind of know in case you run into another project that has them. It's kind of a legacy. A lot of times they're empty because they were just markers for when you wanted that directory to be a Python module. Now it's not necessary, but I still put them in because this is a project skeleton and you probably need to put text or code in there, so go ahead. Okay. Now that's most of the files we need. Now we have to do something called a setup.py. So we have everything in there, but we need to make a setup.py. And what I'm going to do to sort of save time is I'm going to copy it from my fancy little backup directory with all of my secret magic code. There. And I'm going to cat it out. Okay, so this is how you configure Python to install projects. And it's just a generic template. And let me flip over to the web version so you can kind of see that in the location in the docs. So there's the docs. And all this is doing is just trying to import some stuff and set up some stuff. And then this is something that's used to create your projects and when you install it on the computer, and various other things we'll get into later. But for now, just type this in. There's nothing magical in here. The only thing that might be a little different is this, but don't worry about that. When you do asterisk asterisk, it basically takes a dictionary and it explodes it out. I can demo that for you. So let's do Python. Def hello. Here, let me go with this. Let's do y equals none and j equals none. Okay, I got that file, or that function, I mean. Now I'm going to make a dictionary named args. Let's just call it that. And y is going to be z, and j is going to be, oops, j is going to be shaw. Okay, when I do hello asterisk asterisk args, it takes and turns y into an equals parameter and z as the value, and then j as a parameter and shaw as a value. So when I run this, oh, I have to spell it correctly. It's just terrible at spelling today. So when I run this, it runs like that, and that is exactly the same as doing this. Okay, so all this script is doing, when we go back to the docs, is it's taking this here, this description in config, you're setting all these options in a nice handy dictionary, then you're coming down here and you're exploding it into key values that you pass to the setup function. Okay, so now we can move on to the next part. Now we're going to take and create a simple little test. So again, I've already got this test written, so I'm trying to speed this up. But we're going to call it name tests. So tests, name tests.py. And we move name tests to tests. All right, now I'm going to cat name tests. Okay, this is just a blank template. And the idea is you would change the name of name and you would change these to do what you needed to in a first test. And you would change this name too. And that way you don't have to look up why, like how do you do a setup, how do you do a teardown, how do you make a test. Now we'll get into automated testing in the next one. But now we should be able to do nose tests, and it should run one test, and that was this right here. Now if you want to see that output, you can do nose test -s, and it will show you setup, IRAN, and teardown. Okay, so now we should have a final directory structure. We can do, I believe this will work. Oh, it's very long. So we have our base directory up here. We have the dunder and init files, and we have the tests. Now let's look at one more thing. That output is just useless. Let me do this. We have this. In bin, we don't have anything. In docs, we don't have anything. In name, we have those two directories, and I'll cover this in a second, the PyCache. And then in tests, we have this. This is the file that nose ran when we ran it. Okay, what is PyCache? In the old days, Python used to create a second file called nametests.py C. It would be called this. Like that. And that was the cached compiled version of all your code. And so when you ran it the first time, Python would compile, they would process your Python code, and it would save it to this faster to load version. And then from then on, it would load the faster to load version. So then when they did Python 3, I guess they got tired of that, or they ran into a lot of problems, so they took an opportunity to change it. So they created this PyCache directory. Okay, so if you ever have a problem where, let's say you delete this file, but for some reason it still keeps running the code, it might be good to just delete this directory entirely, so that way everything gets redone. Okay, that's pretty much everything. The only other thing would be, don't do this to run your tests. It works here, but that's only because the test is super simple. If you were to try to load other things, it wouldn't work. So don't do that. Next one is, oh yes, the problem with nose. So nose tests is really great. I've always admired this piece of software. Just worked really well. Back in the day when we were doing Python testing, it was pretty much everything was terrible. Nose is the only one that was very sane. But the author doesn't want to work on it anymore. It's done. So in the future, we're going to be using something called PyTest, which seems to be actually better. I think is better. But for now, just use nose tests. Okay, let's make a sample project. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to copy the skeleton over to what we want to call the project. So let's call the project, let's just call the project exercise 46. Okay, so now we've duplicated it. And we can come in and we can modify this. All right, so the first thing we got to do is we have to rename names. So let's move name over to ex46. Okay, and then in our tests, we also have to move tests, name tests to tests, ex46 tests.py. Okay, and once we do that, we then have to edit the tests and setup. But I like to just go ahead and run nose tests just to see things fail. So here, no module named name. That's because we renamed it. Okay, so now I am going to load up my editor. And give me a second. All right, so the problem is that this file right here it refers to the old name. We have to change it to ex46. Okay, save that, flip back to nose, and nose test works. There we go, ran one test. And you can do -s to confirm that. Okay, so now we want to change the setup file. So let's open a setup file. Oops, that is not what I want to do. File, open file. And we're going to go up to there, and we're going to open up setup like that. Okay, so now we're here. And what we would do is we would then start changing these variables. So we would say an example from exercise 46. And then I go ZA Shaw and some URL. Learn Python the hardway.com/python3 ex46.html, and we're to download it. Nowhere. Oh, let's do it. And let's see my email, help@learncodethehardway.com, and point 1 is fine, and then we just say it requires that, and the packages are ex46. Project name, ex46. And I'm going to save that. All right. So now we have our setup file configured. Once we get a little further, we'll turn this into how we install a piece of software, but the virtual env we created is going to make this a lot nicer. In the past, you would have to install it in the base system. It was just a pain. But let me just see if I can do it. Install. Let's see if it happens. Hey, there we go. So if you want to type that last command, you totally can, and it will install what you just made as sort of like a fake project. It doesn't do anything. If you want to uninstall it then I believe it's remove. I never remember. It's always like uninstall or remove, ex46. Nope, uninstall. And so then it will say an egg is like, snakes have eggs, right? Okay, so then we go yes. And there we go. Very strange error. But anyways, shouldn't be that big of a deal. All right. So that's how you do a simple project skeleton on Windows. There's another video for OS X if you're curious about that. And the OS X video will also work on Linux. They should be almost exactly the same. All right. That's the end of this exercise. Please move on to exercise 47. After you've created this test, then you should be able to move on to the automated testing exercise that comes after this.